opportunity to converse with all of you. We have just had a few exciting days deliberating consciousness, trying to find it, trying to define it, and so on. I was wondering if maybe we can start with you, Nick, and if you could help recap or help reshape our understanding of the distinction between cognitive consciousness and phenomenal consciousness.
Yes, of course, Tenzin. Cognitive consciousness is in a way a much older notion. Psychologists have for a long time wondered about how thought is constituted in the brain, how we're able to make decisions and integrate our perceptions and so on, and have come up with a model of the mind in which there's a kind of global space in which mental states are represented, to which we have access. In that sense, I'm conscious of any of my mental states which I know that I have. But that model of consciousness says nothing about what really matters to us. It doesn't mention sentience. It doesn't mention what's so special and remarkable about our ordinary experience of consciousness. And as I see it, phenomenal consciousness, as philosophers call it, has come in possibly later in evolution as an aspect of consciousness which has quite a new kind of content. And its content is what we mean when we say it's like something to be in a conscious state of seeing red or feeling pain or hearing the birds sing.
Right. Tatiana, maybe you can help us understand a bit better. As we understand phenomenal consciousness now, there are other elements to it, social consciousness and so on, meaning that it's not just informed by a prior cognitive process, but there are other layers of processes that design the content. Would you help illuminate some of that, please? Yeah.
I would be happy to illuminate it for myself. Because if you make another step and think, for instance, about artificial intelligence. So what about them, potential them? They definitely have a cognitive sphere and even computational, to be simple, yes? But we hope, the whole humanity hopes, they won't have phenomenal.
It's a big hope, yes.
We can accept to some extent that they'll pretend. But we must be sure that they are simply good actors, that it's not real, if you agree. So phenomenal consciousness is such a strange thing, because all of us feel and even know that we have it, but there are no features. So we cannot catch it. If a cat or a dog with whom we live for years, and we love each other and we understand each other, but if anybody asks what are the features of that phenomenal part of the interface, right, I can show nothing, and nobody.
So then I wonder, I look at my dog and I see him enjoying living in the world,
Of course.
Exploiting the wonders of consciousness, or so it seems to me, in the same kind of way that I think that I do. I mean, when I take him for a walk and he bounds away and he jumps into the river and he throws himself back, in a circle, and here's a creature who's not just living in terms of perception and cognition and so on. For him, something matters, and what I think matters to him is the sense of selfhood which he gets from bathing in phenomenal consciousness.
I totally agree, but now, to put it more clear, I meant strict scientific features. This is what I meant. Neither EEG, nor cardiac waves, nor neither anything can show us that it's phenomenal and he is not acting. After all, when I think of artificial intelligence programs, I'm afraid of zombie, of course, in a philosophical way.
But they existed prior to artificial intelligence.
Everywhere, all over. But when I look at a cat or a dog, I never think it's a zombie. Yes, that means that in non-algorithmic scheme, we catch it. We know how to feel it. After all, when we read a poem of a wonderful poet, we cannot describe why it is a, he's
But
a
what is
genius.
it? What
We
is the
simply
nature?
feel it.
What is the nature of that feeling? How to catch it? From here,
Scientifically,
from what
I'm sure we
part of my?
cannot catch it.
But what's interesting is, yes, you're right. When you look at a dog or a cat, you can't even imagine that it's a zombie. You look at a butterfly or a snake even. My intuition that phenomenal consciousness only arrived late in evolution is challenged by the whole Buddhist tradition of wanting to attribute it right the way through the animal kingdom.
Yes, and embodiment too, because our bodies are much more alike, even if it's a dog or a cat, or even a crow, than a butterfly. I have nothing against butterflies, of course, together with Nabokov. But, yes, but it's an absolutely different creature. So body means. Do you agree?
Yes, but you see, we still can ask, maybe there is a possible scientific entry there, because if an animal or machine, for that matter, has phenomenal consciousness, it must have been designed for a reason. It won't have been an accident of evolution. So there's some benefit coming to this animal from having this kind of experience. And in my view, there's a very clear benefit. It changes the nature of the self. It changes the whole psychological profile of the individual who has it. Animals which are self-conscious in phenomenal sense think of themselves as having an importance, mattering in a way which a non-conscious creature doesn't. And because of that, and this is the wonderful thing, they also think of other creatures like themselves as mattering.
So this is. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is the reason for consciousness, to thinking about myself.
I think for phenomenal consciousness, yes. I mean, it's the opposite. Many people think, no, phenomenal consciousness is very primitive. It corresponds to the Buddhist notion of gross consciousness.
Gross consciousness,
Yeah,
yes,
it's nothing sophisticated about it. I think that's plain wrong. Even in, looking at the blue sky, there's such a degree of structure and phenomenal content to it that I think it's absurd to describe it as gross.
But it's
No,
also.
but it's not gross in terms of. I think, it's not an issue of semantics. It's not gross in the sense that it's not sophisticated, or that it doesn't have layers of experiences. Because when the Buddhists are talking about this kind of differentiation between subtle and gross consciousness, much of the subtle element of consciousness pertains to particular kinds of practices that goes above sort of intellect, goes above a certain kind of perception, commentaries, projection, and so on. So it's mostly, the distinction between subtle and gross is mostly to that level. It's not to say that the gross should be undermined, or that the gross is not sophisticated, or that the gross is not desirable. What's not desirable for a Buddhist is to be trapped in the gross consciousness. But the world is beautiful just with gross consciousness, and the Buddhists are not denying that. Things like the experience of awe, or experience of wonderment. You see, it's in some ways, yes, it is a desirable experience. It makes us feel certain things. As you said, there could be a loss of self, there could be a sense of humility, there could be a sense of meaning or purpose attributed to it, and so on. But these are all experiences of gross consciousness, and they're plenty beautiful, right? And they're plenty meaningful.
Interesting. I mean, because I think sometimes what people mean when they talk of awe is actually more some state of mind which is going towards enlightenment, which is in fact leaving the sensorial. So,
Exactly,
yes.
exactly.
But I would still want to insist on the significance and the central importance of the basic level of being there.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, one cannot experience awe without cognitive,
Yes.
without phenomenal, but the transition need to be made. So, for example, if I'm watching a beautiful sunset, right, and I'm jumping up and down just saying, look at this beautiful sunset, to the point of annoyance, where I stop the observation. You have some individuals like that,
Yes.
right, where they're jumping, they want to describe it and so on. We are not going beyond gross consciousness at that moment, right? That in order to truly contemplate the beauty, the wonderment, you have to enter that subtle state, but
Yes,
it begins
of
with the
course.
gross level.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
you brought us to two important questions which I always have before me. One is, weren't you hinting on the existence of a vector of evolution? Because you said it goes, so where can it go?
There is, and we know there is a vector of evolution, that in a sense it moves from simple to complex in terms of organization.
What for?
But I didn't say there's anything for. I mean, there's no Aristotelian telos
it's me
behind
who
this.
says what for.
Yes, yes.
And the second question is why the universe, sorry for pompous words, needs someone who is conscious.
This is the main question.
Atoms
This is the
know
main question.
what to do. The periodical system goes on. Everything is there. All the laws of nature are there. It exists. So why does the universe need a mirror to look at?
Well,
Because
maybe-
it's too dull without it, or what?
Yeah. Why do we need consciousness? And also, why
We,
do
and I
animal
am
need consciousness?
Asking about the universe, not
my
less.
personal answer, it's we human need consciousness just for the change of our mind.
Just to change our mind.
Yeah.
Why?
Not the world, but our mind.
Yeah,
it's a different
because
story.
is it
The-
only one possibility to change our mind, because that is our experience, our own experience. Maybe it's slightly wrong. We use our consciousness to change something, and then we will get good mental reality, and we will go to the more and more rich and the more comfortable mental reality.
Okay.
We make something inside of us, including meditation.
Right. Okay.
This is the way how to change it. Because if we take a simple person, please change your mind slightly. How is it possible to do that?
With alcohol.
We have to
or
go to the
marijuana.
monastery, ask the monks how to do that, and then we can.
I think Tatiana's question is a very important one. Why does the world need consciousness? And the answer is, I think it doesn't. And
So
therefore,
it just happens.
so it has happened. It's happened here on Earth. It's happened as a result of a remarkable evolutionary trajectory, which has produced creatures like us and the birds and the mammals. It may not have happened anywhere in the universe, else in the universe, and it makes it, for that reason, astonishingly precious.
Of course.
If it was to be lost from the Earth, if life on Earth was to disappear,
Because it's
it'd be
unique.
it'd be a cosmic tragedy, because it's not. I think there's nothing like it anywhere else. I mean, I know most astronomers and so on say everything is duplicated somewhere.
How
in
do
the
they
universe.
know?
Yes. I think there could be a one-off, and we're it.
I have wondered, although, during our meeting, whether in some parallel universe, animals have gotten together to do a conference on human consciousness.
Or in some future world, these GPT or
ChatGPT-4.
yes,
Yes,
they have done the most possible good for the planet.
For the planet.
They
It could be
switched us off.
off. It could be plausible. It could be
Everything is
plausible.
Reminds me of
wonderful
a
after that.
story sent in of Samuel Butler in a book called The Way of All Flesh. He describes how embryos, there's a society of embryos which have a discussion amongst themselves about the possibility of life after birth. And it's
Wonderful
say-
idea.
Yes, and it's very
Perfect.
sophisticated discussion. And some of them maintain, yes, of course there will be life after birth, but it'll be so different from life before birth. We won't be able to describe it or conceptualize it, and so on. It's a wonderful
That
allegory.
would be a beautiful
Still-
theater.
Yes.
Oh yes, still a very dangerous question, impossible in an academic
Context,
world.
yeah.
What are they doing there in the womb for 9 months?
For what purpose after that?
But,
Let-
but
let-
still, something
Right,
is
right.
happening. They are. When do they wake up? I have no idea. I studied biology, so I know. I get my highest degree if you test me. But still, 9 months.
You know, the humans go through all kinds of shared experiences, presumably. We communicated to each other and so on. But then there are certain kinds of experiences where we do find, at least we confess, in terms of limitation of languages and so on, that even it could be a common experience like describe the taste of a good dark chocolate. Right. In order to truly convey that to you, it's the best I can do is offer you a piece of it.
Of course,
And say,
of course.
here, taste it for yourself.
Because otherwise language appears, which is my former love.
Right.
Which is an enemy, of
Uh-huh.
course, because it spoils everything.
Right.
It gives you tools
Right.
that could be erroneous.
Right.
Yeah, and Tenzin, I think you're actually homing in on a very important aspect of phenomenal consciousness. Which, when I look out at the world around in these beautiful woods, for example, and I see the colours and the light coming through the trees and so on, I am projecting my phenomenal experience out onto the world. The greenness of the leaves there is coming from me. But in doing that, I'm connecting directly to you because I know that leaf over there is creating in you something parallel to what I'm experiencing. Neither of us are living outside of consciousness in which the greenness doesn't exist. We suddenly, I see the world, because we're enchanted in this way, it actually at the same time we become a community with everyone else who, like ourselves, who's experiencing it like that.
Right.
I remembered we talked about Luria
Yes,
3
yes.
days ago. When he was in Central Asia, he carried out experiments with Piaget's things like definitions.
Yes.
And he came up to an old man and asked him, what is a tree? He said, here is the tree, just look at it. He said, I see it, but what is a tree? Can you describe it? I repeat, this is the tree. Now imagine, Luria says, that I came from the world that, where there are no trees. He said, then there is nothing to talk about. The end of the experiment. It's interesting, by the way.
Yes. And unfortunately,
Just look at it.
Yes, yeah.
It's about the taste. Oh, this wine is wonderful for you, but
So
not for me.
maybe it's because he has not the tree inside of mental reality.
Yes, it's a
Just
different
look
type of
outside.
mentality.
Like a
of
concept
course,
of-
of course.
yeah.
So they have no tree inside of his experience.
There's a converse to that story where a Buddhist monk was at a gathering in the US and another person held an apple in front of their face
Yeah.
because they had read plenty of Buddhist books to ask what is an apple, and he was hoping for a response like nothing else. So he kept waving the apple in front of the monk's face and says, what is this? What is this? Hoping for some profound response of some sort. The monk looked at his translator and said, has he never seen an apple before?
Exactly the same story. But they say, by the way, small kids
Yeah.
give similar
Responses,
reactions,
yeah, yeah.
responses.
But
yes.
it's an interesting question. Could we got some object inside of our experience without looking it? Is it
It's
possible?
about your meditation stages then.
I think the human capacity for imagination is interesting, but I think there are two forms to it. One form of imagination is driven by some existing content that we sort of add layers on it and then make something of it. But then there are other kinds of imagination, traits that individuals would say that I'm baffling, I didn't have a pre-ground for it, like a content and it just appeared, sort of thing. But, that's one of the challenges in the Buddhist world, or in human experience, I think. One of the things that I felt we did not talk too much, at least in this form, in our conference, was sense-making. We spoke of experiences, right? But we did not speak of this caliber of sense-making. Tatiana, what would you add to it?
As always, I come to the stage from a different door.
Right.
So I was wondering and maniacally asking all the neuro images, how is a point placed in your brain, not in the mind, but in your brain, or equality, the sign of equality, or multiplication, what is it like to have it there? It's not a material thing. The same could be addressed to music, because we had numerous talks with you. When it comes to your ear, it's a physical signal and nothing more.
Just wave, no more.
Nothing more. But when it starts moving
Yep.
along your
Because
nerves,
it generated new
then
objects.
it appears to be music, only in case if your mind already and not the
Yes,
brain
and
is-
it's a lesson which is still lost on a lot of
A lot of
consciousness
people, yeah,
researchers.
yeah.
Oh, yes.
There are many distinguished scientists now who are searching for the neural correlate of consciousness, expecting to find something material in the brain which has, for example, phenomenal qualities.
Of course.
So we are,
Are you for that position? Do you think there
No,
are?
I think it's a disaster. But it's one of the most popular, fashionable
Fashion
theories.
things,
It's called integrated information
Yep,
theory,
yep,
for
yep.
example. But there are other examples also of it. So in that sense, it's very interesting. The science of consciousness, I think, is going in the wrong direction at the moment. All the funding is going into absurd
The
enterprises,
finding, of course,
looking.
it's the main thing.
Yes, yes.
It's a wrong.
That unfortunately
The
is the
wrong
wrong
start.
driver. And time. Let me switch a bit more, which is
Or mathematics, sorry.
mathematics
I will
is
never
another
stop. So mathematics and music. So my question to a whole set of musicians, good musicians, even composers, and to mathematicians was like that. If humanity escaped from the planet, there are no living human beings. What about music and mathematics? And I do not mean papers with the texts. Music itself and mathematics itself, is it still there? And there are two possible answers. One comes from Galileo, of course, who said that the creator used mathematics to make the world. So then humans are out of the play, yes, if I put it correctly. But the other answer, and the most frequent one, is that it's human. It's because we have this type of brain and mind, and the majority gives such an answer.
Do you think that the majority of lay people would say mathematics is a construction of my mind or your mind? I think many of them would believe it's something which
nature.
we just discover it. It's out there already.
But imagine you're an octopus.
Yes.
We now know.
No, Tatiana, I'm not disagreeing with you about what the truth is. I'm sure that we invent mathematics,
Right.
and therefore it's not an objective fact of the universe.
we are very
I have no decision because I am here and there.
We are very close
bad.
to say that our mind construct, create this world inside of our brain. Reconstruct. It's just reconstruction.
Brain or mind?
Yeah.
Again, that starts.
In our brain, it's just reconstruction of the surrounding reality. Because otherwise we can't install that reality just in the brain directly. It's impossible. So with only one chance, we have to reconstruct, to create new reality in the brain. But of course, it's approximately the same. Mental reality and outside reality. Otherwise, we can't live here.
we can't function in some ways, right? One question I had was, all of you have been in the field for a lifetime, and there are current and future scholars, researchers, practitioners who are looking at your work and so on. And I understand the necessity for defining constraints and parameters in scientific studies. But what would you say when people become a fan of a reductionist approach to the discipline itself? Should it be encouraged, or should we encourage them to resist reductionism of sorts?
They should.
I'm not sure. I think reductionism is a good ambition in a way.
Okay.
If there are ways of simplifying the descriptions of nature, which make sense, then we should go for them. I mean, it's in the end there's a beauty and an elegance and probably a truth about simpler explanations, which we should be striving to understand.
But
we shouldn't try and do it by force. I mean, when in fact it's imposing a reduction on something which actually is irreducible.
All is good, but do you believe your mind? We might have hallucinations, all of us, or me, myself, and all of you, and this world is within my head. So what shall we do with this? What I point at, psychiatric data are not involved in, or minimally involved in all our discussions, which is bad, because for instance, if you have multiple personality phenomenon, there is something to discuss. How do they move there? All of them have their own phenomenal and cognitive experiences,
and they're very unhappy.
And they're very unhappy, and they can't get rid of the neighbors.
But Nick, to follow your logic, I mean, we are lovers of simplicity, even by training and so on. But we see a distinction between simplicity, simple explanations, and a reductionist approach.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Meaning that, and again, as I said, that I acknowledge that constraints and defined parameters are important in terms of exploring certain knowledge fields and disciplines. But reductionism, in its own way, presumes that things should be just in this particular manner. I could discover something and try to define it in a simpler way, or find a simpler explanation for it, but it need not necessarily sort of reduce.
No, I agree. And also, we had a good talk at our conference about dialectical materialism.
Yes.
Engels' brilliant book on dialectical materialism is a kind of a program for seeing things as emergent from the reality of emergent phenomena, and saying that the level of discourse we must adopt is going to be at several higher levels than the atomic material which constitutes things, not because it could in fact be reduced, but because it couldn't be reduced.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to get your take, because when we were trying to sort of explore consciousness, we came across the differentiation between kinds of consciousness versus states of consciousness. Vis-a-vis sentience, without sentience. Any thoughts, reflections on that?
I think that you managed to create cosmos from chaos. my today's favorite topic. Yes, because still there are some points to which you can be, orientation map or whatever. You at least can think where to put this or that phenomenon. It's not a totally fuzzy space anymore. I think it's very important. What else do we, at least Konstantin and myself, we talked a lot about it. We are sure that it's the crisis of neurosciences, and there is no use in collecting tons and tons of facts if you do not change a paradigm. It's the time to have some new look at it, because otherwise you get those tons every day. You even cannot read it, not only think it over. So what's the use of getting them? He's less cynical than myself. He tells me, don't be so skeptical, because a time will come and we'll have tomographs that will show you every neuron. I do not need information from 86 billion neurons, to say nothing of glia.
Maybe simple answer. Consciousness, just awareness about myself. No more, no stages, no functional state. It's just awareness. Of course, it's maybe more clear. It's gross consciousness. It's not clear, and we can't feel it. So it's subtle consciousness. It's not level. It's just how it's like a lens.
Right.
It's more clear and less clear.
No, but even the adjustment of the lens, to continue analogy, the opening of the aperture, the focus of the lens, it implies that there are different degrees of consciousness. Right? And most sort of Indic philosophical systems and so on do make that distinction between a wakeful state of consciousness, a sleep state of consciousness, an awakened consciousness, and so on. Right. So, Nick, anything on your end in terms of degrees of consciousness, states of consciousness versus kinds of consciousness?
Why you say state of consciousness? It's just brain functional state. Sleep, it's one of the brain's consciousness. No. Sleep is just brain functional state.
Okay.
It's awareness. It's just brain. But
it is a distinct state from a wakeful state, right?
And I think sentience is a distinct state against non-sentience.
Right.
I don't believe there's a gradation all the way from nothing to something. It's at some point in the history of our ancestors, we woke up to a different level of phenomenal content.
Which was a sudden process.
Probably very quick, I should think, within a few hundred generations maybe. And once that had happened, then of course there can be gradations of sentience because we have different sense organs, whether more attentive or less attentive. We can take drugs to enhance it and so on. So of course each of us has different degrees of sentience and is interested in different areas of it. So our consciousness, you couldn't map mine onto yours exactly, but you can certainly say that you and I both have something in common which is not present in an insentient animal.
But if you continue your logic, do we need consciousness for biological adaptation? For biological adaptation?
Yes.
For biological? Why?
Alexander, why not? Why have we got it if not? What do you think created consciousness if it wasn't natural selection, Darwinian natural selection, which is driven by adaptation, by the fact that some traits prove to be biologically beneficial in ways others are not?
Maybe you are right, but I guess that maybe we have additional adaptation, cognitive adaptation. We got more and more knowledge. For that one, we need consciousness because we need check what we already has in our experience.
And you think that process is evolutionary?
Yeah.
Right?
I would say a different story. We probably need these extremely complex mechanisms to get acquainted with ourselves and to develop ourselves, irrespective of the external world. We need to know who we are.
Right. But that's the thing.
Which is the most difficult things of all.
Right.
And here, what can help us? These are not scholars. These are not scientists. It's poets and writers, the best of them, because they dare, or those who are here and there, like Huxley, for instance.
But I think we shouldn't underestimate all human beings.
Yes, right.
I think we're all born to be philosophers.
Right.
No, I
and
mean
poets
those
as
who
well.
can describe it.
Yes.
Not that everybody else
But
do
we
not
asked the
feel
questions
Yes.
for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
I mean, let tell you a story. My 6-year-old daughter said to me one evening, she said, "Dad, I'm really worried about something. How do I know I'm myself?" And she said, but she went on, then she said, "But if I wasn't myself, I couldn't ask the question."
Perfect.
Okay? Yes, but it's not because she's a genius.
Absolutely.
It's because it's the kind of problem which occurs to everybody. Yes.
Speaking of drugs and altered states, there's a resurgence in the interest of psychedelics and altered states and so on. And a lot of them, there are some good signals in terms of the clinical applications of those things to deal with addiction, sleep, trauma, and those sorts of things. But then there are a lot of them who are trying to draw parallels between psychedelic states and other, again, to extend the term, states of consciousness, to make it more creative, to make it more susceptible, to mirror the universe, and so on and so forth. What are your current thoughts, reflections on those kinds of methods?
I'm not the person to answer such questions. It's just not the reaction of a scientist. I'm afraid of such things. The machine which is here is so complex that I won't dare
Insert things into it. Right.
And Tatiana, and you and I, and maybe Tenzing too, and Alexander, actually all come from a rather innocent generation, I think. I've never experimented with psychedelic
neither
drugs.
me, for unknown reasons. Because when we were university students, it was a fashion for that. Yes, so everybody
They were beginning to
had
yes.
that possibility. For some reason, I never even tried. And it's interesting why. I think because I was afraid. I do not like to lose control, totally.
That's interesting. That's not my reason. My reason is that life is extraordinary enough. That I don't want to push it
Exactly
to another
so.
level.
I would second that.
Yes, I agree.
Let me move to the two other topics that at least I would like to hear your thoughts on. One is, humans have a whole spectrum of experiences with this consciousness. They have fragmented states, they have states that they don't make sense of, they have states that they make sense of. And then there are descriptions of non-duality, non-dual experiences of sorts. And again, there are both sides of the school. There are individuals that have gone through it through contemplative methods. Some have gotten a glimpse of it accidentally in a haphazard fashion through awe, wonderment at some point. And some have experimented with LSDs and things of that nature and claim to have had that experience. What do you think is going on there? What is like, we can extrapolate stories and narratives about the value of such an experience of non-duality. But why do we as humans even seek oneness? You see the paradox that we spend our entire life being unique. And then we are trying to seek a sense of oneness.
Well, in a sense, because we're frightened of separation.
Okay.
So I think that's one thing which can drive people. I mean, it's, to be a human being is an extraordinarily lonely position. I mean, Pascal looked at the heavens and said, well, how has it come about that I am here in this vastness, to which I cannot comprehend? And the more I see it, the smaller and more uncomprehending I become. Great philosopher, Blaise Pascal. And I think that is something which we'll run away from if we can. If we can find some solution to that, don't worry, Blaise, it's all right. Everything is one. You're part of the universe. But what reality do we give to that idea? I'm not quite sure.
But if we were to follow that, then the feeling of non-duality should be super comforting.
Yes.
Right? But we get overwhelmed
Yes.
by the sensation of it.
Yeah. I mean, you experience it. Do you know what we're talking about? Because I'm not sure. I've had quite that
Another
experience.
aspect probably just came to my mind about this wholeness or oneness, don't know the word. Some time ago, I reread Darwin for some reason. And in one of the chapters, he writes, I'm proud that I come from those first animals that have been created or appeared somehow. For some reason, I was extremely impressed by it. So that line that goes from the start, and here it's me.
Right.
Yes.
A whole
That's a
lineage
very
of evolution.
intellectual take on it. But see, another reason perhaps why we seek oneness is it's what we had to do from the moment we entered this world. the world was unbelievably crazy. Our minds hadn't come together. There were probably many different selves embodied in this one head.
course.
And somehow or other we had to bring them back into unity, like a conductor bringing the orchestra into so that they're working just to create one line of music, which is our life. Now, given the importance of that and the way in which our brains must have been designed to relish every example of closer integration, maybe then we extend it beyond outside ourselves then, and in the same way to make it all.
So we are discussing
Alexander,
about why we have wholeness picture inside of the brain. Answer very simple. We have dynamical mental model of external physical world inside of the brain. Like an airplane, for example, three-dimensional model, we can move it in different sides, and we have a powerful neural net inside the brain. It's 1 million multiplied per billion contacts between the cells.
10 to the power
Because
of X,
of-
right?
Quadrillion.
Quadrillion.
Because operational unit in the brain, it's not the neuron.
But,
So it's
but
big-
why does it prompt us to seek oneness with the tree, with the environment we are in, with the rock, which is non-sentient by most descriptions? But this desire, you see, to not be separated, to feel that oneness, what's prompting that?
Yeah, but I mean, we do have this urge to do it. We can't do it. It's
Exactly,
very difficult.
exactly.
I mean, Lucretius wrote a wonderful sonnet about lovemaking between human beings, and said that the greatest tragedy of being human is the uniqueness of the soul, that we try and become one with some other person, and in the end we can't. And so it's and yet we strive for it.
Right. We can't talk about life and consciousness and sentience without touching on death and mortality, right? How would you characterize that state, that process of phenomena?
What kind of process?
Death.
You mean from the inside or from external view?
Both, meaning, like we are discussing consciousness, we are discussing sentience and suffering and so on, which is all blocks of life.
Well, I mean, there's an easy thing to say.
Right.
Death is like going to sleep. You lose consciousness. And then you don't dream and you don't wake up again. But what's, of course, extraordinarily interesting is the suggestion there may be something else going on in dying brains. Konstantin gave us a paper to read yesterday, suggesting there may be some very strange physiological and therefore psychological processes associated with the end of life, which could, of course, have been responsible for near-death experiences in those that don't die, which have then led to all sorts of religious and other interpretations about the soul and about the afterlife. And so
Everybody's seeing the white light and trying to make something of it.
Yeah.
All of us know, at least in the textbook, it's like that no one but us know that there will be the end. But we know that animals, those who live with us, for some reason they feel it. How could it be? They are not reflective. If we know, probably they are. So what is that they feel, that they some cats go away to some forest and live there?
Are they being sad? Are they grieving? Or is this all human projection?
So what is it?
Right. Alexander, you have been observing people after death, some selective process.
But
What do you think is happening?
But again, what are the clear your questions again?
My question is, what is death?
What is that? What around that of us?
Of us. When we are talking about life,
Or inside of us.
consciousness, sentience, what is death for us?
You see, the main of our, I guess it's main point is personality. It's personal experience. Even you have small animal, it must have small experience. Experience means some kind of small, very small model. What has happened around? What is the world around us? Because without that model, it's impossible to do something. Of course, we know conditioning and so on, but it's not enough. We need to predict what to do in this reality. We need model of that reality. And evolution, cognitive evolution, goes to make the more and more rich that kind of model inside. And on the some level of that model, consciousness comes, because that model suddenly think, but who made this model? Myself. So this is point when consciousness comes to me. I made this model. Who I am? I made this model. So what is the connections between me and model and with reality? This is level of the evolution of our experience, where consciousness comes to that.
I think erroneously that complex things like consciousness appear as a function of complexity. So the organism or brain becomes more and more and more and more complex, and then there is a threshold after which you have consciousness. But it is not so if we remember cerebellum, for instance, which is extremely complex. Yes, is it?
It's extremely for the control of muscles, no, not for the understanding the world.
Yes, of course, but still there are quite a lot
It's a lot of neurons inside. Yeah,
things.
yeah.
But it doesn't help.
Okay, Nicholas, what?
No, I'm going to come back to the question of what is death. And one very obvious take on it is that it's the precondition for life.
Okay,
that if we didn't die, there wouldn't be new generations. And I mean that literally, there wouldn't be evolution either. Darwin's theory of evolution, which has created all the wonder of nature, says that it's all been created by death, by previous generations which were not as adapted as the next one, were eliminated.
So that's the evolutionary function of death.
Well, it's a function of death, but it's also a reason for us not to regret it.
Right.
I mean, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for this history of death.
So you think consciousness has its own evolution?
Yeah, I think not its own evolution. I think consciousness is part of our own, of the animals' biological evolution.
Okay.
I would even say that, yes, it has its own evolution. And what the Buddhist monk shows us is that evolution, because they have a much more complex knowledge, if it's knowledge, feeling.
But it's a big question from the point of Buddhist theory, because maybe consciousness is just substances without any changes.
No, it has changes. It just doesn't have the material basis in that regard. Maybe to close the conversation, perhaps, as far as I am aware from our studies, that we humans, of all the complexities and thought processes that we possess, we also possess the awareness of our own mortality. Mm-hmm. Very few species, if none,
none of them
demonstrate that. What should we do with that awareness?
Comfort each other. It's. I mean, to say you're not alone in that. This is going to be your future. That you're like everybody else. Every one of every creature that created you from the past all took that step from life to death, and here you are as a result. So this is part of the continuous line of life. I think, nonetheless, of course, we can worry about, in some traditions, about what follows death. Mm-hmm. If you consider that the possibility is that after this life on earth, you are going to another life in which you will be judged or you will be punished or whatever it may be, that could be a terrifying future.
Moment.
And of course, a lot of Christian Catholics, for example, have been and still are terrified by the prospect of hell. Now that's one. I mean, of course, there's reasons why we don't want death too soon. There are reasons to be frightened of it. But there are also, of course, times when we welcome it. I mean, people welcome it. I've written actually quite a lot about suicide and worried about the fact that death can be so attractive. And that it can seduce us into taking steps to end our own life in order to escape, to avoid suffering, for example, when in fact, if only we'd given ourselves a chance, there would have been other routes back into the world and back into happiness. So I think that, interesting enough, awareness of mortality has only come with human beings. Suicide is only present in human beings. And in humans, it's been a very powerful influence on the history of our species. Argued, in fact, that there may have been points in the history of our own species when whole populations despaired and took the easy way out. There's a cave in northern Spain called the Cave of Bones, where they found...
yes, it's amazing.
Yes.
How could that be?
Because people jumped.
And I would also add that it's about values. Death is about values. If not death, we wouldn't have any culture. No Shakespeare, nobody. Nothing to think about, nothing to write about.
I think that's why Buddhists have gone to length about literature on death, meditations on death, and in some ways making death less of a mystery and less attractive as well. That it's life that we're looking forward to. We are embracing death. We are not avoiding it or denying it. But the fact is that it shouldn't carry more attraction than life in some ways.
Yes.
Right. So.
But you managed, I mean, you Buddhists, you managed to escape the question of how can it be that your personality moves, not your atoms or quarks or whatever, but your personality moves to a different body. There are no hints in a physical world. I mean, how can that be? I also told you that at the first meeting with His Holiness, I put that question, and he's absolutely wonderful and wise. He said, we do not need any proofs. We simply know it. You are the scientists. Where is your work?
Yes, prove it for us.
Yes. Perfect.
One question comes to me about happiness. Is it our goal or aim of the human being, or maybe it's just a phenomenon?
I think it's partly in my perspective, it's partly also a function of the culture that we are part of. Because we discuss avoidance of suffering, that many species exhibit that phenomenon. But I think, again, unique to human awareness and sense-making is the idea that we seek meaning in life. And that sense of seeking meaning or purpose is tied to our experience of joy or happiness. More than pleasure, even, at times.
More and more pleasure.
No,
So
more than pleasure.
More than pleasure.
Yeah, having a hot cup of tea is
I
pleasurable.
understand, yeah.
But this is not entirely content as an experience. Yeah?
Okay.
It's not entirely sort of
It's
brings
interesting.
joy, right?
What's your definition of happiness?
I have never actually ventured into defining happiness. I simply suggest I simply have suggested happiness as absence of suffering. Or absence of, not even suffering. I would say absence of misery. Of sorts.
That's a very negative definition. Really? You want that one?
The reason being this. You see, if you look at the emotional graph of our brain, right? You take a day-to-day graph of our brain. What do we experience? Sadness, pleasure, you see, jealousy, envy, anger, you see. And then there are moments when we experience gap. You see. And because we are not experiencing the peak states of certain emotions and just experiencing gap, oftentimes we actually confuse that as a happy state, not pleasure state, but simply that it's good that I'm not experiencing any of these negative states. It's just a gap at that moment. But it's different in Buddhism from, say, a sustained sense of joy. Here we are, in the presence of beautiful company, in a beautiful environment, having discussion on beautiful topics.
It's a similar story to those about a tree and an apple. You either feel it or not. So how can you describe it?
Maybe I'll end with this story I was telling another friend here. When I first got to MIT, it was my third year at MIT, and I recognized that many of my students were spending 17 to 20 hours in the labs. The lifestyle was such. They had not even left the buildings, or they would not even leave the campus. And we have a beautiful river, Charles River, and so on. So one day I organized this symbolic thing that we'll go out of the building, cross the river, go to a cafe, enjoy a cup of cappuccino, some desserts, and just have nice conversation. So many of the students were gathering for that, and I step outside of the room, and I have another young student right across on his computer. And so I looked at him and said, "Joe, are you not coming?" And he turned around and he says, "Venerable Tenzin, it took us 10,000 years of civilization to get indoors. I don't understand the fascination of going out."
I'm going to end with this line is, "The world is so full of a number of things. I think we should all be as happy as kings."
Yes. Yes.
I'm still wondering how after you wake up in the morning, you are within the same place and time. How do you understand that it's you looking at the mirror?
You bring up this at the end of our conversation.
That's why, to be continued.